Okay, I am here at 500 Plank Road, and we're looking at the John S. Crawford Farm, also known as the Basil Biggs Farm. This is going to be a video series called Basil Biggs at Gettysburg, and this is going to be part one. Now, Basil Biggs was born in Maryland on February the 1st, 1819. His mother died in 1822 when he was just 4 years old, leaving Basil to be hired out to work for others. Now, his mother left him $400, which was quite a bit of money in the early 1820s, and that money was used to educate him, but it was later stated that his education would be made with his hands. Now, around 1840, he married a woman named Mary Jackson, and they moved their family to Pennsylvania in the 1850s so that their 5 children at that time could receive an education. Now, Bigg settled here in Gettysburg in 1858, and he used the home of John Crawford, which we're looking at in front of us, as a tenant farmer to conceal runaway slaves during the day. In 1863, just before the Battle of Gettysburg, he was working as a veterinarian or a horse doctor and a tenant farmer. At this time, John Crawford Farm became a stop on the Underground Railroad. And I'll show you in a later video of the John S. Crawford Farm where they hid the slaves at in the barn. But again, it became a stop on the Underground Railroad as fleeing slaves escaped Maryland. They crossed the Mason-Dixon line and made their way north, likely following the route along Marsh Creek, which goes along the house right over here. You can see it in the distance there in the center of our camera. They used the Marsh Creek as the route to avoid detection by the slave catchers. Now, of course, Marsh Creek and this part of Gettysburg is right here near the Mason-Dixon line. Biggs then brought the fleeing slaves to different Quaker communities across northern Adams County, which was an illegal and a dangerous act. During a brief raid just the year before, in October of 1862, Confederate General Jeb Stuart and his cavalry crossed the creek just over here onto the property, right in front of the John Crawford house. Now, the John Crawford house, the stone part of it, was built in 1799. Before that, a barn was built in the year 1785, and as well as another house up on the hill. And we'll look at that in our John Crawford Farm video. But this has been Basil Biggs at Gettysburg, Part 1, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Facebook, and we're here looking at the back side of the barn, the addition part from 1840. We're going to walk inside, and I'm going to show you where Basil Biggs, the African-American who was a tenant farmer here, hid slaves. This is John S. Crawford Farm Part 3. It's also going to be Basil Biggs at Gettysburg Part 1A. And as the slaves made their way up Marsh Creek, just prior to the Civil War, this area here, inside of here, may have been used to hide these runaway slaves. And it's hard to see, but it actually is underneath the bank area of the barn. It's really cold in here when you look inside, so it's definitely understandable that it could have been used to store produce as well as hide slaves. And again, this is the addition of the barn, probably built in the 1840s. Also used as the field hospital for Sims and Barksdale's brigades, who fought just literally a mile and a half where our camera is pointed in this direction, which would be eastbound. Now, the other thing about this is this is the addition. The original part of the barn was actually built around 1785, and it's actually the Scottish side of the barn, which is this side here. And we're going to take a walk in here. That's Crawford Farm, and I do apologize, my camera died. I had to get it recharged. And we're going to do the continuation of the John S. Crawford Farm, Part 3, as well as Basil Bigg's at Gettysburg, Part 1A. And we're going to be looking at the Scottish part of the barn here, which was built in the year 1785. Now, the homestead that was built shortly thereafter actually sat on a hill just in the distance in front of our camera up there, and there is an old well out there that we're going to take a look at later. And also some of the original lilies that they brought the bulbs for and planted, still their offspring still grow on the farm today. But this part of the barn that we're going to go in now was actually a part that the family lived in 1785 before they built their first house, and of course before the 1799 structure that we looked at in Part 1. This was also part of the field hospital of Barksdale's and Semmes Brigades. And we're just going to take a quick walk in here and look around at the original stone wall where the family lived, and also where their animals were. And today the nickname is the Farm by the Ford. I was also told that the walls were built rounded, as you can see in the corner over here, so that when the cattle would come in, they would continually move and not get stuck in the corner. So this part is from, now there also was originally no floor. A floor was added, but this was all open. And the beam and the log work is from 1785, as well as the stone structure down here. And of course, many wounded and dying soldiers from Barksdale's and Semmes Brigades were here in this part of the barn here in July of 1863, suffering. One of the things that's really interesting about the barn is the way it's put together, that Scottish style of peg work. And you can also see a lot of the water wheel hewn logs and so forth still, logs with the bark still on them. But again, this has been the John S. Crawford Farm, the continuation of the John S. Crawford Farm, Part 3, as well as Basil Bigg's at Gettysburg, Part 1A, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Basil Bigg's at Gettysburg, Part 2 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And I'm in the Gettysburg Square. Now, with the threat of Confederate invasion of Pennsylvania, Basil Bigg's likely remained anchored in Gettysburg at the John S. Crawford Farm until the morning of July 1st. Between the morning and the afternoon of July 1st, as his farm became engulfed by Confederate troops, Basil Bigg's mounted a horse and drove in through the town, through this way, around the Gettysburg Diamond, and then down straight along the York Road between the David Will's house here, just beyond the left flank of the Confederates that were converging here on Gettysburg. Remember, you had Confederates coming from the north and the west. Basil Bigg's farm is in this direction. He comes by here just beyond the Confederates coming from the west, and also from the flank of Confederates coming from the north, goes through the Diamond and then down the York Street. And he would continue on his horse all the way to Wrightsville, Pennsylvania. Now, Biggs and other black residents were right to fear the Confederate Army on July 1st. Albus McCreary witnessed rebels gather a number of colored people and march them out of Gettysburg. One of those being his washerwoman, Elizabeth Butler. She escaped and hid in the Lutheran church nearby with the help of some of the white residents of Gettysburg. Another black woman, likely Isaac Smith's wife, escaped capture because her white employer refused to yield Confederate troops, insistent on taking her. When the fighting forced her to her employer's family to relocate to another house, the woman again escaped capture because of the intervention of the neighbor. This time they brokered a deal with the Confederate officer for her freedom. But again, Basil Biggs escapes the John S. Crawford farm coming in this direction on the afternoon of July 1st, 1863, narrowly escaping the Confederate Army coming from the west and also from the north, as then he takes off on his horse down the York Pike and stays in Wrightsville. On our next video, we'll be back at the John S. Crawford farm talking about what he returned to after the Battle of Gettysburg. This has been Basil Biggs at Gettysburg, Part 2, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Biggs at Gettysburg, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook, and we're back at the John S. Crawford farm. Now, when Basil Biggs returned with his family, they found that the Confederate Army had set up a field hospital on part of their farm, and the entire property was covered with items dropped by men of both armors. Biggs later filed a claim for the loss of 8 cows, 7 steer, 10 hogs, 6 beds, 16 chairs, and 92 acres of destroyed crops, 8 tons of hay, 10 crocks of apple butter, 2 sets of dishes and jellies, and additionally 45 Confederates were buried behind the house in the area that's in the center of our camera. Most of them Basil would actually reinter elsewhere. Their bodies would stay here on the farm until they were disinterred and then sent back south in wooden crates. Again, Basil Biggs did file a damage claim with the U.S. government for the damage that was done here to this farm. However, there was no any kind of money ever given back to the farmers in the town here at Gettysburg. So, of course, Basil Biggs would then also move to such places as Hanover, Pennsylvania, and began to disinter Union cavalry out of the Battle of Hanover on June 30th, 1863. We're going to look at that in our next video, Part 4, and then we're going to go to a farm that he would later purchase as his own farm, using the money that he used to raise the dead and put them in 2 boxes. This has been Basil Biggs at Gettysburg, Part 3, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, this is going to be Basil Biggs of Gettysburg, Part 4, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And we're taking a look at a photograph that was taken on February the 6th, 1864. And Basil Biggs is in the photograph, also as Samuel Weaver, the man holding the book. And today, this photograph location is right here. And we're going to talk a little bit about the site here in Hanover, Pennsylvania, where this photograph was taken on February the 6th, 1864. Now, as the remains of Union dead were taken from different towns nearby to be brought to the National Cemetery in Gettysburg, there was a contract that was put out, which finally was awarded to Franklin W. Besecker. He put a bid in of $1.59 a body, and he was awarded the contract. And he named 2 supervisors, a man named Joseph S. Townsend and Samuel Weaver, to oversee the exhuming of bodies from the Battle of Gettysburg and also from the Battle of Hanover. Now, the picture that we looked at was one that was recorded in Hanover, and it is the only documentation visually of soldiers being actually exhumed. These were probably one of the 19 soldiers that were killed, probably cavalry soldiers from the Battle of Hanover on June the 30th, 1863, just the day before the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, there was a account of this actual event in a program in 1915 that said bodies of Union soldiers who were killed in Hanover were conveyed to an apartment in the Flickinger Foundry on York Street. The Flickinger Foundry once stood back here where this building is today, at the site of the Trinity Reformed Church. And this is the old Trinity Reformed Church cemetery that we're in now in Hanover. Right out here is York Street, and today the church sits right over here to the north side of the cemetery. The cemetery itself being in an alley just here near York Street. Now, a leading citizen of the town of Hanover named Henry Wirt ordered caskets made at 9 o'clock at night, and the dead were placed in these caskets and buried in the churchyard of the Reformed Church. So this was 9 o'clock at night on June the 30th, 1863. Again, this was the Reformed Church Cemetery near the public school building, which was the Flickinger Foundry area. The graves were marked, and later the bodies were removed to the National Cemetery at Gettysburg. And again, that's a 1915 account. And what I did, and in that burial party is Basil Biggs of Gettysburg, the guy that we looked at in the first three parts as a farmer in Gettysburg who narrowly escaped being captured by the Confederates and making his way and escaping out of town. And we'll look at what happened to him post-war in our next video. Today what I've done is I've come here and marked the spot where these bodies were being removed from the grave. And if you looked at the grave photograph, you can see the bodies being disinterred, the men holding huge meat hooks, lowering them into the grave and pulling the remains of these soldiers literally out of the grave to be placed in caskets. And then from here, their bodies were most likely moved up what is today Route 116 West into Gettysburg, and then of course to the National Cemetery. But the photo that we looked at the beginning was a photograph, had Samuel Weaver, who was one of the overseers, and several black men, one of those men being Basil Biggs of Gettysburg, removing bodies from this Trinity Cemetery that we're standing here in Hanover today, to be removed and then brought to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and buried in the National Cemetery. This has been Basil Biggs at Gettysburg, Part 4 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook.